The title of today's webinar is Calculating the Cost of Quality for Life Sciences, Perspective from a Former FDA Investigator. Speaking of whom, that is Vin. So Vin Cafiso is a former FDA investigator specializing in med tech. He has had a successful career spanning startups all the way through leading quality roles at companies like Becton Dickinson, C.R. Bard, Smith & Nephew. He started his own consulting practice, and he's now leading quality and regulatory services at CREO. Is it CREO or CREO, Vin?
CREO.
CREO, okay. With that, a warm welcome to you, Vin. Thank you for joining. And our second host today is Ryan Donahue, who is Redica Systems VP of Sales. Welcome to you, Ryan.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that.
And then just a quick about us. So Redica Systems is a data analytics platform built for quality professionals at life sciences companies to reduce compliance risk and ultimately improve product quality. So very germane. And when Ryan and I met Vin, we thought this was a no-brainer. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Ryan.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. Really appreciate everybody who's hopped on. It looks like we still have more people filing in, but anyway, I wanted to just kind of set the stage here and add some context to how we got this webinar going. Vin's going to talk about this in his deck, but I was scrolling through LinkedIn, as I'm sure many of you do, either during the day or at night or weekends, whatever. But I'm always looking for little nuggets of wisdom and things that can help our customers or help our team here at Redica. And I came across this post from Vin, and Vin titled the post, "What is the cost of a Form 483 observation?" And that obviously rung a bell with me because we're talking about this constantly here at Redica with our customers and trying to help them understand how can you potentially avoid 483 observations. Most likely not going to completely avoid a 483. Obviously, that's the goal, but what can you do to limit the amount of observations you get, and how can you use data to help with that? So that's really how Redica helps our customers, and other various ways as well. But the question is always, what is that actual cost of responding or receiving a 483 and an observation? Not just one, but some 483s have 5. Some, we've seen some really scary 483s from some inspectors, but I won't go into detail there. But anyway, so it was a really, really great post, very thoughtful, very well thought out by Vin here. And so we reached out and just said, "Hey, Vin, we'd love to do a webinar with you, bring this to a bigger platform than just a single post on LinkedIn, and invite all of our customers, our folks within the quality world within life sciences." So that's how this got started. That's how this webinar was created. And of course, Vin was kind enough to say, "Yeah, I'd love to do that." So Vin, I'm gonna turn it over to you and kind of let you start talking, and we're gonna try to make this interactive. I'm gonna ask Vin some questions, and then we're gonna start to show you how do you calculate the cost of quality for life sciences.
And we're going to get started. And of course, this is always exciting for me to get to talk to folks like you and to talk to folks in industry. That's how I learn. That's how we all learn, by sharing ideas. So no, thank you for that intro, John and Ryan. Yeah, no, I do tend to post some things on LinkedIn that I feel are appropriate, that I feel are hoping to help people learn. And so I'm glad that this particular post kind of resonated with you guys, because while the quote unquote cost of quality conversation can be very long, and it could be very very interesting, this presentation is more around how the actual cost of maybe poor quality, or the cost of a 483 and an FDA inspection can actually do some real harm to your business, not only in terms of the actual costs of the time it takes to respond to a 483, but then some of the hidden costs. And so I'm going to advance the slide, and since I can't see you guys, please interrupt me or say something if you wanna join. Okay.
I will definitely do that, Ben.
All right, great. So yeah, this is a little bit about me. I won't dwell on the slide, and of course, if John and Ryan will be sharing these notes with the team that is joining, then you can see all of this. But John did cover cover things. I would assume that possibly through the learning of this webinar, you may have actually gone to my post. You may have actually gone to my LinkedIn profile. So if you haven't already, follow me, even connect with me, because I do try to put out content like this, each week to help to educate and elevate our community. And by way of doing that, as a side note, as I mentioned earlier, I do learn a lot. I do learn a lot from the comments. I love the comments. I do try to respond to everyone's comments because that's how I learn as I'm interacting with you all. So I do appreciate if there is anyone in the audience there that has interacted with my posts. I thank you. And if you haven't yet done that, please do it. I do learn, and I think that conversation of you and I going back and forth hopes to educate other people. So
Yep.
definitely engage. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna go through maybe a not so or maybe a real life scenario, and we're gonna sort of jump off from that scenario into some of the things that you should be doing. So we kind of felt like, when Ryan and I were talking, we kind of felt like it would be appropriate to kind of get into maybe some of the nitty gritty of what to do when you do get a 483. So some of the common practices of, building a response team, determining true root cause, some pitfalls of CAPA, as everyone knows, that's the acronym for corrective and preventive action. Once you've submitted your 483 response, what do you do after that? And then we'll start to get into really some of the costs, the hidden costs versus what we believe to be would be actual costs, which is what I was referring to in my post. And then we'll talk about some cost avoidance tactics. And then there were a really good number of submitted questions. And so I really did my best to try to tailor the content of this presentation to the questions that were asked. And then I also did put a few questions at the end, which I thought were good conversation starters. So that's what we'll do.
Yeah, that's a great call out, by the way, Vin. There were a lot of great questions. We really appreciate everybody who submitted their questions. There were so many that we can't obviously cover everything today, but we will be reaching out at the end of this webinar to make sure we answer everybody's question as best as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So here is the scenario. All right. So, and this scenario is something that happened to me both as a consultant and also happened to me in real life. As a head of quality for a medical device or an in vitro diagnostic company. So I've had this scenario. Maybe not in terms of the impact of the scenario, but I have certainly had the scenario where we are being inspected by a seasoned investigator from the United States Food and Drug Administration, right? Generally speaking, there will be a pre-announcement, right? And that pre-announcement is anywhere from 2 to 4 days, generally speaking. It could be longer, and it could be shorter, and it may not even happen, right? So it really depends on the company and their compliance history, and as well as the reason for why the investigator is planning to come to your firm. So we won't get into the details of all the different scenarios of when you may or may not have a pre-announcement. If you are a firm that is operating overseas, you will have more than 3 days. Certainly, you will have probably more like 3 months, and you will have not, as it says here, the inspection lasted 9 days. In most cases, a foreign inspection will last only 4 days. But during the 9 days in this particular scenario, countless procedures were reviewed. Records which are demonstrating compliance to those procedures were also reviewed, and many of your firm's subject matter experts were also interviewed. So all of the subject matter experts, all of the SMEs that are responsible for educating the investigator on that particular area of interest is the person who has to sit across the table from the investigator. Generally speaking, every investigator is different, but at least in my experience as a former investigator, I didn't like to just always sit across the table from the head of quality. I really did want to talk to the people who were doing the work, the people who were the experts, the people who could really help educate me in terms of the different areas of expertise that there are in a company, all the way from research and development to supplier controls to change control, to document management, to production, to inspection, and to storage and shipment. So all of those different people that would generally be asked to be interviewed would be the people who you would expect to be there, right? So part of that is knowing that you have all of these people that are essentially going to be on board. And so in this scenario, at the conclusion of the inspection, a form FDA 483, which is also known as inspectional observations, was issued to your firm's senior most official. Okay. And so in this case, you have 5 inspectional observations citing the following subsystems, and you can see them there, from complaint to CAPA to design to process validation to internal audit. And there are others that can certainly be cited, but at this stage of the game, the clock, the 15-day response clock is now ticking. Okay. Anything from your side, Ryan?
No, I was just going to comment that I think this is a really good example here, a really good scenario to play out, because this is fairly common. Receiving a 43 is it's not, I think you even said this when we were talking about this before, Vin. It's not a matter of if you're going to get a 43, it's a matter of when. So, being able to walk through this scenario of receiving 5 observations, sometimes you're going to get maybe 1, sometimes you might get more, but I think this is a good segue, a good scenario for us to cover here in this conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, so this scenario, as I mentioned, this is either a real life scenario that I have been through, or a scenario that, that my clients have been through. And so this kind of got me thinking about how to, again, sort of help elevate the community and giving them some of this information. And so that's really what drove this post. And so, Ryan and Redica, they did a great job promoting this webinar, and they also linked this particular post. And so, of course, I'm not going to read it here, but this post really did, as Ryan mentioned, kind of prompt some thoughts about, hey, this is something that I think we should really drill down on. And so hopefully in the next couple of slides, we'll really help kind of drill down a little bit into each of these areas.
Couple things to add here while we're on this slide, Vin. So number one, I just went back and I looked at that post on LinkedIn. This got a lot of engagement on LinkedIn. I think there's just shy of 500 likes and 166 comments on this post and 102 reposts. That is, if you don't follow LinkedIn and metrics on LinkedIn, that is a lot of engagement with one single post. So, obviously this struck a chord with industry. So I think that's one of the big reasons why we wanted to take this a little bit further. We knew it would. But what prompted you to write this post, Vin? Is there any, besides the obvious, is there anything else that you were like, hey, I was just at a customer site and helping them with a mock inspection or responding to a 43? What really prompted this post from you?
Yeah, actually, and it actually maybe goes to some of the questions that were asked for this webinar.
Mhm.
It was some of the conversations that I'm having with people who, and I try not to employ what I would refer to as scare tactics in my posts. I try to be very factual and in some cases maybe even a little bit conservative. Like some people who are on this call right now will say, wow, 1.5 million, you should see what happened to us, right? And it could be 3 million or whatever, right? So the purpose of this post, again, is not to scare anybody, but it's just to give them sort of an average scenario for what happens at the conclusion of an FDA inspection. And again, what kind of prompted this, to answer your question, Ryan, was some of the conversations I was having, kind of more, kind of in the weeks and weeks leading up to this, were by people who had never seen FDA before, right? They're either new companies that had recently launched a product,
Mm-hmm.
or founders who were still in the process of that journey of getting their product, qualified and getting it through the FDA submission pathways, right? And sort of not really feeling like they had anything to worry about, right? Not really feeling like, hey, FDA is something that we have to worry about, like after we submit our application and after, before we go commercial, right? So that was, I think, kind of what the driver was, to just give them a little bit of insight into, yeah, so now you've got a product on the market and FDA comes in a year or so later. Do you want to cripple your new business with this kind of overhead, or do you want to try to get out in front of it and build your quality culture along the way as you're building your product, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
That's key. That's key. All right. Well, let's start from the top here in your post, right? You talk about creating an all hands on deck approach. How do you recommend doing that? I mean, who's involved? Share with us the kind of best way to attack this, please.
Yeah, no, and that's a great question, Ryan, as it kind of sort of leads into the next slide, but then it kind of each of the next slides kind of feed off of that process, right? So the next slide here really does kind of get into this, right? So yeah, I mean, to the point previously made in the post, it really is an all hands on deck approach. You cannot be doing this in a vacuum. If you're the head of quality, or if you're a quality professional, and you're kind of like on the hook, quote unquote, right, for responding, the all hands on deck approach is basically everybody who is involved in any of the subsystems that were cited, and anyone who couldn't just lend a hand with their expertise. They really have to be engaged, right? So, and this engagement doesn't obviously start the day that the FDA leaves, right? This engagement is happening during the inspection. It's obviously happening prior to the inspection, right? To make sure that all the areas are ready to go. And so the first team, the first and most hands-on team really is the subject matter expert team, and the key stakeholders, the people that kind of are directing the efforts of the subject matter experts, the people that are supporting and helping the subject matter experts, right? These experts are essentially assigned to investigate and respond to each 483. So individually, you may have an SME who is let's say the R&D person, right? Because of the design controls finding. And then you may have a production person who is responsible for the process validation issue. And then you may have quality who's going to be involved on the internal audit side, or if there's something to do with potentially complaint handling, right? So you're going to have a multi functional or a cross-functional team of people. And so right off the bat, they have to kind of get involved in, hey, what is the issue? We know what the issue is because we were really there, part of the inspection, but that's in the fog of war, and it's kind of hard to really focus, right? So having the subject matter experts all aligned and giving everyone direction in terms of like who does what by when, that's really the key here for this top internal team. The second internal team is really in my opinion, the team that is essentially blowing wind into the sails of the first team, right? It's executive management. And if you're working at a large multi-site company, typically you will have quote unquote corporate personnel, people that do have some stake or some ownership into what the issues are, right? So this executive management team generally is going to be there, obviously there prior to the inspection. They're aware of what's happening as it's happening during the inspection. Every minute of every day, they should be engaged in terms of what's happening. They should also even be demonstrating to FDA investigator that they are engaged and that they are that they are committed to making sure that all of these issues are addressed. And so that's really what executive management is there for. They are there to make sure that the resources are there. They direct and or agree with the commitments being made, right? So executive management has to be on board, right? Again, we can't be recommending something that executive management would not support, right? So this is really part of this response team, this rapid response team, so to speak, is to make sure that everybody is on board. And because at that point, you're going to have a lot of doers, a lot of people who are trying to get a lot of things done, and you really need to have executive management there to ensure that things are moving, that any conflicts are being resolved, people are held accountable, and more importantly, executive management is reprioritizing all of these competing priorities that are not getting done because you now have to take 2, 3, 4 weeks straight of trying to figure out how to deal with this 483, right? So there are going to be things that are going to be getting done, not getting done, like critical design reviews that are happening on new product launches, or supplier audits that were scheduled for next week, or what have you, right? So there's a lot of business critical activities that are probably not going to get done. They're going to have to be reprioritized, and you're going to need to get executive management's buy-in on all of the risks associated with this.
Well,
Okay.
so to kind of touch on that a little bit more, Vin, one of the questions we received was when do you involve executive stakeholders, and maybe even more so, what actually gets them to the table to engage in helping with this? Because a lot of times it's they're at that corporate level where there's other competing priorities that they're working with or working on. You know, I know from talking to customers, it's a struggle, right? Sometimes to get the executives involved and engaged as much as possible. How do you do that? How can our customers do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main, well, it definitely does not happen like you don't all of a sudden start engaging with executive management like the week before an inspection, right? And
Or
during
after
an
you
inspection.
receive a 483, right?
Right, exactly. So they're really, I mean, quality really should be the champion of what it takes for a quality system to be established, maintained, and continues to be suitably effective, right? So quality really needs to sort of be the champion of that, and there has to be, monthly or quarterly check-ins with those executives in terms of what's happening and what's going really, really well, what's potentially going not so well, and what do we need, additional resources on, right? So that cadence should be already established and in place, right? And then as you sort of approach an inspection scenario, you will have a much easier time engaging with executive management. They won't be surprised. They will see what is happening. They will be engaged, and letting them know early on, and again, not inspection scenario early on, but early on in terms of your involvement with them is, letting them know that that a quality culture really does start from the top, and it starts with the way that they speak and the decisions that they're making, and how they're considering the customer and patient safety in every decision that they make, right? So executives kind of need to know that that's their role more broadly. And then once you have issues like this, it really helps employees, especially the subject matter experts and all the people that are doing so much great work. It helps them to see that executive management has their back, right? Hey, what do you need, right? How can we get through this as easily and painlessly as possible, right? And so, yeah, I think as early as possible and as frequently as possible is really the name of the game.
Great.
Yep. Yep. And then, obviously there's going to always involve some level of an external consultant in this case, right? Consultants will be coming in from the outside with potentially, like, time tested and battle tested templates and ways to describe things. And so the consultants will help support the process. They will. The second bullet is actually rather important, and it doesn't always have to be a consultant, but it certainly has to be somebody who is completely impartial. You do need somebody to basically write the response as if it was written by one person. When you have multiple teams involved, you may get a level of complexity coming from, say, for example, the R&D people, where they may be describing things that are maybe a little bit hard to understand for people on the outside because they may be using vernacular or acronyms, right? So that sort of final pass, so to speak, is to sort of read through the entire response and make sure that it's being written as if it was in one voice, or one person wrote it. Making sure that any jargon or any internal acronyms are not being used, or if they are being used, they're being explained properly. And then, really making sure, because this is FDA's expectation, making sure that each individual 483 is being responded to in a more comprehensive approach. And I think we'll get into that a little bit later in terms of like, what does that really mean? And then, right, you need to make sure that there's formatting that has to happen to make sure that the response includes each root cause. Actions are going to flow from root cause, right? What is your measure of effectiveness, and all of the other things like evidence of the things that you have already taken and all of the actions that you've already done, the timeframes that you're committing to. So I think the consultant or this third party is somebody that can help with these different items here. Okay.
Where do you start?
Yeah. Good
Once
question.
you've built the team, right?
Yeah.
The support network, where do you go from there?
Yeah. Yeah. No, great question. And it kind of leads us, I think, into this next slide, right? Because the first thing you have to do is you have to really, as I mentioned earlier, right, you're kind of assigning SMEs in particular, the people who are responsible for each individual finding. You really have to get to root cause, right? So, and I put it in bold or in capital letters, right? Do their best to get to true root cause. In some cases, that's almost, I don't want to say impossible, but in some cases, it's actually really, really hard to get to a true root cause. And so what I always say here is, don't let perfect get in the way of good, right? Because you can't always iterate as you go, right? As you learn more, right? So the first step really is to understand the full depth of what of what occurred, right? What was the investigator finding? It could be that they were finding something and they issued a 483 on something that you happen to know may actually be a little bit of a bigger issue than what they actually cited you for. So you feel like maybe that was a potential where they could have gotten even more critical in terms of what the 483 included, right? So, but this is your chance to actually drill down and really get to the most logical root cause. As I mentioned, all of your corrective actions, they must flow from each root cause. So if you have, in this case where I have here, some observations may have more than one cause, you have to make sure that for each cause, you have actions that actually flow and will demonstrate that you are taking action on the root cause, as opposed to sort of making a conclusion as to what needs to be done and then trying to kind of back into what the root cause is. And so you'd want to really do that. And then, as it says here, you want to be sure to perform a horizontal analysis, which is essentially an analysis that goes kind of side by side, to see if there are any other products or processes that have the same issue. So if an investigator was identifying a gap and issued you a 483 for some, I don't know, lack of line clearance or lack of a validated process for a particular product on a particular line in a particular building, right? Then your responsibility as a response team is to make sure that you're looking across all of the other production lines, all of the other locations and the physical locations, different shifts, if you have different shifts of operation. So all of this has to be taken into account across multiple operators. You really have to be taking this horizontal approach, and that's really what FDA's expectation is that you will become or that you will respond in a more comprehensive way than exactly what that one example was in the 483.
Well, and I really like this last bullet too, the under commit and over deliver. Again, that can be taken a lot of different ways. That's a broad term there. Can you give it like a specific example of what that might be like? Where you undercommit but over deliver?
Yeah, this is a good one. So sometimes sometimes there's specificity around an issue, right? A 483 might indicate, for example, in our example where you were cited around internal audit not being done. Well, that response may be a little bit easier, right? It may be, well, we're going to ensure that we stay on track with our internal audit schedule, and there may be some root causes that led to that, but essentially we're going to commit to getting on track with our internal audit process, right? And so, and you could word it a little bit more specific than that, but I wouldn't get too much more specific. So what I mean by under commit and over deliver is that you are going to take these actions and you're going to improve your internal audit process to make sure that you never skip or forget to do an internal audit. What I'm saying is don't commit in your response to establish and implement an EQMS, internal audit tracking program, right? A solution electronically or something like that, right? Like that might be too much of a commitment. And while you're doing your investigation, you might realize like, oh, actually, we don't even need like a full solution like this. We really just need to do this, this, and this. And we may even be able to use Excel to remind us of things, right? So sometimes you don't want to overcommit because you know that you will be learning more and during the continued investigation and during the work that you're going to be doing after you submit your response. And so, but what I always say is because the response process is not just you respond the day that you have to respond and then you forget about it, you're going to be continually sending in updates. And so that's where you have an opportunity to maybe like add a little bit more to say, hey, during the investigation, we're learning more. So we're actually committing to doing a little bit more than what we originally committed to. It's so much easier to do that than to say, oh, by the way, we said we were going to do this huge thing. And we realized that's like too much work, it costs too much money, and it's going to take way too long. So yeah, we're not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of like hard to back away from a commitment that you make in the initial response. So that's
Right.
really try to right size it to the extent that you can, and maybe slightly be a little bit vague so that you don't overcommit to something that may not be even appropriate, let alone possibly too hard to do.
Got it. Okay, that makes great sense. Yep.
Yeah. And so for the next slide, again, this is a webinar all in and of itself, right? So I am not here to educate you on CAPA because even on LinkedIn, there's some really great people that do a phenomenal job. One of my friends, Georg Diegel, he does a phenomenal job educating me and so many other people on CAPA. And so each one of his posts can be a webinar in and of itself, let alone one slide.
You heard it
So
here first, folks, from Vin. We're going to have another webinar with his friend on Kappa.
yeah, Georg Diegel, go for it. He is one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, and he's got so much great information on Kappa. Like literally, he drills down, and if anyone is a Kappa coordinator and you don't know Georg, just set up a meeting with him. He's a great guy and he'll teach you so much. So yeah, and this is actually some of the stuff that I learned from him, right? So of course we mentioned, right, does your kappa get to true root cause? Yeah, you may learn something along the way after your response is submitted that may lead you to expand a little bit, but again, don't let perfect get in the way of good and get to true root cause, at least the most reasonable root cause, right?
Yep.
Okay, and then some of these other bullets, right? So is your root cause method documented? You always have to show your work. This may not be at the level of a response, but you certainly would have to make sure that you showed your work for when FDA does come back to inspect you. They'll expect to see all of the root cause investigations and the way that you got there. And as I mentioned earlier, making sure that once you have gotten to root cause, that your actions actually flow and you're taking actions that will address the root cause. This kind of goes back to the, under commit, over deliver. Make sure your timeframes are reasonable. Like it's kind of like this knee-jerk reaction to want to make sure that everything is due in 30 days or 45 days. right? But also be careful about when you are committing to due dates that you don't have a stack up of due dates that are all happening on the same time,
Mhm.
right? So you may even have to stagger your due dates based on when they are due, not necessarily when you think that they can actually get done.
Right.
So again, just trying to keep that stack up of due dates reasonable, and also, give yourself some extra time. You don't ever see a follow-up warning letter that says that your timeframes were too far out, right? But you do have to be able to say, well, because we're going to take 6 months to fix this, here's how we are mitigating the risk of what you identified prior to us putting in the ultimate solution, right? And so that's what you would want to put in your response.
Yeah, and this is sorry to interrupt, Ben, but like
No, that's okay.
this is part and parcel to a lot of what we do here at Redica to help our customers with the data that we provide. You can analyze all 43s issued with observations calling out kappa specifically, or even rolling up into the quality system like deviations and investigations, right? And this is a very, very common citation. So do you recommend like using external data to help prepare and even potentially respond to a 43, even though that you're looking at data that might not be 43s that were issued to your org? Just getting an
Yeah.
understanding of why people are being cited with these types of 43s or these types of observations, um, to maybe negate any potential observations in the future. Like, what are your thoughts there on utilizing that data?
No, data is great, right? It's the short answer. Anything that you can obtain in the midst of responding to a 483 that will help you right size that response is tremendously valuable, right? So through Redica, I believe you can do freedom of information on responses, right?
Yeah, we actually have uh, thousands of 43 responses in our
Yeah.
platform. We can FOIA for
Yeah.
that. So yes.
So there you go. So you can maybe find a 483 response for a kappa issue or for a process validation issue, right? And you
Mhm.
can kind of, see what has been submitted. Now, of course, the caveat is you don't know if that response was accepted, of course, but you can certainly use it to kind of judge whether or not you're in the right ballpark of how you feel like you should be responding.
Mhm.
So yeah, no, that's really helpful. And there's some other things here too, right? Like you have to make sure that your due dates are being met. Any kappa that is established as a result of a 483 will not, if it gets looked at by FDA, it will absolutely get looked at by FDA. So these are like your golden kappas. These kappas have to be almost perfect in terms of meeting your dates.
Right.
If your dates are not being met and you have an approved extension, do you have a good justification, and do you have a risk mitigation strategy for continuing to let this extend?
Right.
Right? Verification of effectiveness, quote unquote, is what is expected. I see a lot of kappas. One of the pitfalls that I see as a consultant is that companies will write in their kappa verification that all of the items that we said we were going to do, we did, right? So we updated the procedure, we retrained people, and kappa is effective.
Yeah.
And so you have to be really careful not to fall into that trap. Sometimes it's tough to create an effectiveness plan if it's for, say, how you respond to a recall, right? So you improve the way that you respond to the need to do a recall, and your effectiveness would be, well, we're going to wait for a recall, right? Well, we don't want to have a recall, and
Right.
hopefully we don't have more than one a year or something
Yeah.
like that, right? So it will take you really a long time to do effectiveness for something like that. So you might actually have to do like a mock recall just to be able to demonstrate that when you do this, the actions that we took are actually effective. So you have to get creative sometimes with effectiveness checks,
Yeah.
but make sure that they are not just verifying that we did what we said we were going to do.
Yeah, I'll just throw a little anecdote in here, right? I love how you said that these are like the golden kappas, because the FDA is going to check on these. One of the most common things that our customers, and I'm sure some of them are here and will attest to this, one of the most common things that they're looking at when they're either looking at their supply chain, their CMOs, their API suppliers, their raw material suppliers and excipients, is for repeat observations. Um, And that's just never a good sign, right? So,
Yeah, no, it's the worst. And actually, so during a future FDA inspection, the FDA investigator will ask to see your list of CAPAs since the last inspection, right? So if you're lucky, it's 3 years,
right,
but it may be a year later, depending on the severity of the 483.
right,
And so they're going to look at the CAPAs that have been generated as a result of not just the 483s, but of all of your quality issues. And they're going to be looking to see the similarities between the CAPAs that were identified as a result of the 483 and
right,
also any other CAPAs to see if there is some similarity and see if the company is kind of like, not effectively handling the CAPAs. And then it may be that your 483 CAPA was effective because we didn't have anything happen within, 3 months after implementation. But then you have two CAPAs on the books, which are essentially like something to do with internal audit, right? You're like,
right.
hold on, wait, there was a 483 for internal audit. So now what's happening? So yeah, you definitely don't want to, or to the extent possible, you want to avoid, and that's why effectiveness is so important,
Right.
to make sure that you really get to root cause. That's the only way you get to effectiveness is if you actually get to root cause, and then if everything in the middle is connected,
Right.
effectiveness is just a foregone conclusion.
Yeah, totally, totally. So,
Yep.
okay, so are we submitting a response at this point? With, let's say we have submitted the response. Now what?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that takes us right into the next
Perfect. Yeah.
slide, right? So you're having an inspection, right? And during the inspection, an investigator is hopefully being upfront and honest and communicating with you in terms of what's happening as it's happening. And so you should be doing some level of work there to investigate what's going on. And, you want to always avoid during an inspection, you always want to avoid that kind of knee-jerk reaction to, to just hand them a red line document that see, look, we're fixing this. Don't give us a 483 because you haven't really done the benefit of a full investigation, a horizontal analysis, all of these things. And so if you always run the risk of trying to, I don't want to say argue a 483, but you certainly don't want to just hand the investigator a red line and expect the 483 to go away because they actually might dig a little deeper and say, well, hold on, I believe this is systemic. You think that it's just going to take a red line. Now I'm going to stay another 2 days to really show you that this is a systemic issue
Mhm.
so that I could put all of these multiple examples on the 483, right? So you always have to be careful with that. So yeah, so you're working, there's a 15-day 15 business days. So you have roughly, almost a month, certainly, about 2 days or something like that, right?
Yep.
Depending on the time that, or, when the investigator left. So some of the actions that it's always a good idea to try to do some corrections. Some of the things that you have to do that you believe will really be a good idea to do because, we've got corrections and then we've got root cause analysis and corrective actions. So there may be some corrections that you want to take or some product containment, like, okay, process validation, we therefore have product in our warehouse that is, not the benefit, that was manufactured without the benefit of a validated process. So we're going to quarantine those. We may even have to do a recall to pull back product that has been distributed that was not validated, right? So those corrections and those containments really should be what you commit to and what you complete within that 15-day response period, okay? And so that's what I'm saying here in this third bullet, that some actions are complete and the evidence will be submitted as part of your initial response. And then during that 15-day time period, you're really trying to evaluate each issue. But then again, after you submit your response, you are going to make sure that the actions that you're taking are all essentially risk-based, right? So what I have here is evaluate each issue and take a risk-based approach to ensure that higher risk issues are addressed quickly and completely. So those are the items, as we talked about, those due dates. Those are the items that you would want to be able to commit to earlier.
Mhm.
And then the ones that maybe are not as critical, say like that internal audit finding, that one might not be as critical as lack of process validation or complaints that have late MDRs, right? So
Yeah.
you definitely have to risk rank your response and the timeframes and the containments and the corrections that you're taking as a result of what has happened. right? And then any actions that are not yet done on the 15-day mark, those are going to be in process, and that's okay. These have to, and I said this earlier with the quote unquote golden kappa, right? These have to be meticulously executed and tracked to completion according to the time frame that's submitted to the FDA. Now, there are exceptions, right? You can respond in, 2 or 3 months down the line and realize that, this area is a little bit more broad and a little bit, it's going to take a little bit more time. That's okay. You can do that, but you have to really do that sparingly. That should be really the exception. You shouldn't really have to ask for an extension on something more than, once or twice within the whole continuum of your entire response period. And so within your response, based on all the knowledge of what you have learned in those 15 days, you're going to determine what are the time points that you will be completing things, right? So let's say we try to put completion dates at the end of a month.
Okay.
So what we will do is, and say we have maybe 4 major milestones over the course of 6 months. So we will commit to every 6 weeks, coinciding with those due dates, that we are going to periodically update the FDA with an amended response. So basically we will initially submit them a response, which will show what we're doing, the due dates, and then, green if it's been completed, and, not highlighted yet if it's still open. And then as we complete things, we are going to collect that evidence. We're going to submit that evidence along with a cover letter that says, this is our first response. This is or our first response update, right? You have like your initial response, and then you have your first response update, your second response update, and each of those will essentially have with it highlighting the areas of what's been completed since the last update, and then evidence for the items that have been completed. And so a lot of warning letters actually lead to companies not doing this, right? So this is the number one way to avoid a warning letter, is to get into a periodic cadence of submitting your responses to FDA and making sure that those responses include evidence of completion of the actions. Right. I also see, and we all see warning letters, right? You go to Redica, you can see them. You go to FDA's website, you can see them as well, where warning letters are issued because, we received your response dated XYZ. However, you failed to provide evidence of what you said you were going to do. It's just say what you're going to do and do it, and then provide them with evidence. And that's all you really need to do in this stage. And I think FDA will be really happy to see that you're taking these actions and you're taking them seriously. So that's kind of all I think I wanted to say here, because I wanted to move on to the next slide, because it really is one of the most important, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
So so there are hidden costs, right? And then there are actual costs. So I wanted to cover the hidden costs first, because these can vary significantly from company to company, right? So the first one, which I mentioned earlier regarding executive management, is that you're going to be diverting resources away from, really important, what I say here, business critical activities. And these could be like new product launches, right? So you have delayed revenue. I can't tell you how much that is, but if you have 4 months or 3 months worth of delayed revenue, that could be a lot of money. I don't know. It could be 100,000. It could be $1 million. It depends on your product, right?
Just ask your CFO.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. And that's another good person to routinely talk to. So, and you have improvement projects, right? So some improvement projects are designed to reduce scrap or to minimize mistakes, right? So these are projects that you're not going to be able to get to. And so that there's really good stuff that's being delayed. So again, this first bullet can vary dramatically in terms of the actual cost that's associated with it, right? Reputational damage is another one that's really hard to put a dollar value on, but it is very hard to win back trust. When a customer loses trust in your name, loses trust in your reputation, just like with a person that in your personal life, right? Once you lose trust, it's hard to get it back. It's exactly the same way, with with a medical device company and their quality, right? And then loss of market share, right? A very small percentage of market share loss can lead to a huge loss of revenue,
Yep.
right? And competitors, in particular, competitors that are customer facing, so it could be, a sales rep or service technician or somebody like that, right? They will actually use the 483 against your firm. And they can actually walk into your firm with an actual copy of the 483, right? And they're essentially attempting to sway customers away from your products, right? They're going to ask them some version of this question, right? Is this who you really want to do business with, right? They really are gonna mention something like that. And there's a colleague I have by the name of Brian Callahan who did speak to me about an example of this very thing happening.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I mean, these competitors are going to link a 483 observation directly to the poor product quality that you manufacture. Even if they can't fully connect the dots, it doesn't actually say that on the 483. They'll just kind of use that as hey, do you really want to do business with somebody who gets all these 483s? They must really have bad products, right? And they must not really care about patient safety,
Mm.
and that's again what else they could connect it to, right? So, an average customer, if you lose just one customer, it could be millions of dollars in lost revenue. And again, a recent tale of someone who I was talking to, they said that they had a pending contract renewal. It was a VA hospital, and they lost that contract because of this sales tactic. And so that contract alone was worth 500 million to this company.
Yeah.
It was a big company, granted, but still, that's not insignificant.
Yeah, when you talk about this, we hear these stories too, right? Where let's take a clinical stage pharma company that's got one product in phase 3. It's their only phase 3 product. Gets a CRL because of their PAI at one of their supplier sites, right? Because of poor manufacturing issues. That can cripple all of the millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that have been invested in building out that product, and can delay it for weeks, if not months, if not kill it entirely.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, there's a lot of hidden costs here that, anybody in our industry, I think, can talk stories about all the time.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of
Absolutely.
hidden costs. So
Yeah.
what's the actual cost, man?
Well, I thought you'd never ask, Ryan.
Right. This is what everybody's been waiting for.
Right, right. So this is actually a real scenario. Tongue in cheek, of course. This is a real scenario. And so in this particular example, right, with these 5 subsystems that we mentioned earlier, this took over 6 months for this company to remediate. And we averaged the way that we backed into the salary cost was basically we took the average salary of all of the SMEs that were involved, of course, multiplied by their hours of
Hmm.
effort.
Hmm.
And then you have to take the hourly rate of executives, right? And they're going to have a lot of hands-on time. And especially if you have an engaged ELT or executive leadership team,
Yep.
they're going to want to be on these weekly update calls. They're going to want to make sure that everyone's being held accountable to the due dates. These calls can go for an hour, they can go for 3 hours, and you have 4 or 5, high ranking officials on these calls. And again, I've been on them and I've been leading those calls. You do get into, sometimes you get into the weeds, so to speak, on these conversations, and so they do take time, especially when you're committing resources, and some resources can always be, of course, in the form of people, but sometimes you're buying new equipment, you are asking for new tooling at your supplier, new inspection equipment, you name it. There's a lot that can go into it. There was an ex-FDA consultant involved in this particular case, and so their time, is going to cost some money to get their expertise, right? Their decades of experience and
Yep.
having been on both sides of the table, that helps to streamline the response. That helps to make sure that it's right sized. It gives you that perspective of what other firms are doing. So that's part of that. Right. And then in this particular case, we had recalls because we had a process that was not validated. So the client needed to look at what products were still in date on the market because these were products that were, had an expiration date. So we had to look at the 3 lots on the market that were in date. There were 350 units within those 3 lots. So you could see the cost there. And then we had finished goods, a lot that was in our control. And so that was something that we basically had to, work with the client to scrap that. They had to get new production equipment because of the lack of process validation capability for the equipment that they had. So they had to get a new equipment that was capable of being validated, right? And that takes time and a lot of money. And then, of course, in this particular case, there was they actually under committed and they over delivered in this case. They did not commit to a full Kappa module, but they in their investigation they realized that they should have really had one due to the complexity of their company. And so they did put in a new Kappa module, and between the time to bring that in and to gather the requirements and validate it and make updates to procedures and all of that, it cost, it cost them that. So just those costs alone, not to do with any of the annual costs, you have that 1.5, over $1.5 million price tag.
Well, and if you take that 1.5, divide that by the 5 observations, it's roughly 300,000 per observation.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
So this might be an extreme case. It might be a little bit less. I mean, it could be even greater than this. It could be less, but I mean, the fact of the matter remains there's heavy cost in responding and remediating an observation or
Yeah.
multiple.
Yeah, in this case, so I'll call one. I'll make one call out. Like a hidden benefit of this scenario was that the team that was engaged they were a little bit newer for each other. So some people on the team had been at the company really long. Some people had been there less time.
Right.
So in terms of the team, they really gelled through this process, and they really became a very cohesive, a very well-oiled machine. Their collaboration, their communication, all of this really improved. Their direct link to executives and top management really improved. Top management's engagement with their activities really improved. So there's a little bit of a soft landing for something like this, that you do get some soft, not actual benefits, but like a soft benefit to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, look,
Yeah.
I know we're at time, folks. Maybe we can, if anybody can stay a little bit later, maybe we can answer a couple questions, John, or what are your thoughts?
Sure. Yeah. Let's see.
Yeah, we have basically one more slide, and then we have some questions. So I can present the next slide just as a some cost avoidance tactics.
Yeah,
But
let's do that.
yeah. I mean, we could wrap up on this slide, and of course, if there is anybody that wants to ask a live question, we certainly can do that. But as we've been talking, I think this is a little bit almost of a summary slide. To be fair, right? Avoidance of a 43 is never guaranteed. Right? Ryan said that. I agree. Being proactive is obviously better than reactive. Inspection readiness is not something that happens when the FDA investigator calls you to tell you they're coming, right? This is something that should be happening as a woven into the fabric of your quality system, right? You have many feeder systems that are telling you whether or not you have a problem, and so you definitely need to be monitoring those and reporting on those to executive management, right? That link is so important, right? And as I mentioned, right, this is a long-term and ongoing process, and top management, it starts with them, right? It's a continuous journey. We all know quality is not a destination, it is a journey, but you do need to think of it in terms of a quality culture, because quality really is cost avoidance. When you're doing things right, you're conversely not doing them wrong. And usually when you do wrong things, it results in product that has to be scrapped, or it results in product that has to be recalled, right? So weaving quality into the fabric of your system and your culture is really the best way to do that. And it really has to start early. And right, if you're doing this day in and day out, and you're doing your audits, you're monitoring your feeder systems, right? This is going to significantly reduce your compliance gaps, and this will then minimize the severity and probability of a 483, right? So you're essentially managing risk every day by potentially not avoiding a 483, as Ryan mentioned, but certainly reducing the seriousness of it, like the systemic nature of it. You're really trying to minimize that, right? And so, one way, and I usually mention this to clients, is that we try to help them with mock inspections. We do these routinely. Mock inspections, if you're doing them annually, it's a great way to identify gaps and also to coach SMEs, because sitting across the table from an investigator is a lot harder than sitting across the table from an internal auditor, or even sitting across the table from your notified body auditor, right? My team and myself, I mean, we generally identify on average 8 potential 483s when we do these mock inspections. So they are definitely valuable to your organization. Anyone who's coming into your organization as an impartial third-party observer is going to actually be able to take a fresh look and provide a fresh perspective. And if they're coming in with decades of experience, especially being an investigator previously, they're also going to be bringing in ideas and solutions from other firms, right? And as Ryan mentioned, having data, looking at other responses is helpful, right? And I think also it bringing in that awareness of what is happening in industry and what is happening with regulators and the trends, I think also is what helps part of that undercurrent of inspection readiness.
Great. Well, that was a lot. I appreciate it, Ben, very much. John, what are your thoughts from here?
Yeah, so since we're over time and we've got a lot of great questions, I think we'll end it here. And then what we'll do, everyone, is we will make sure to follow up on email with some written answers to some of these questions. Also, I just want to make note, we regularly host webinars like this. If you want to make sure that you don't miss the next ones, make sure you subscribe to our bi-monthly publication, The Signal. And if you want help subscribing to that, just reach out to blog@redica.com and we will get you subscribed. So thank you to everyone. Thank you, Vin. Thank you, Ryan. And we will talk to you all soon.
Thanks again.
You.
Thanks, everybody.